Good morning and welcome to our event about constructive capital. So how to generate an accountable investment environment. So today we're going to be talking about the factors that promote or fostering what kind of public policies could be implemented for attracting investment, responsible and constructive investments. So we will be listening to the director of the Center for Accountable Investment, Eric Hans. So he will be talking about new ideas for CP. So we will be sharing, of course, in the chat of the event, the link for this document. And after that, we will have the honor to listen to some partners of Skype. Demian Gonzalez from Argentina, and Sasha Hane from Chile. They will be sharing the experience in a moderated panels, moderated by Sergio from Colombia. So right now, I would like to invite the Latin American Department's Director, Jean Samko, to open the event. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first Corrosive Capitals conference in Latin America. So we are very thankful for you to be here for discussing this very important subject for Latin America. Well, the concept of Corrosive Capital was taken by CP a couple of years ago. The work that we've been doing in this area around the world, it's grown a lot and evolved in so many ways. And actually, we have the honor to have in this conference the director of the new Center for the Accountable Investment of CP, Eric Hans. Eric is going to be talking to us. He's going to be telling us about what is this center about and how we can work right here in Latin America. Also, we have here Kathy, and she is the deputy director in Asia type. Kathy knows very good the perspective of China and their goals. So Kathy is going to be sharing a very interesting talk. As you already know, the corrosive capitals, they may have a negative impact in the democratic institutions. Anyways, in SIFE, we believe that these, we don't believe that they have to be eliminated. Actually, they have to be a structure so that they can strengthen the democracy and the prosperity of the citizen. That's why your experiences, insights in every single country are very interesting for us. And I believe they're going to be very important for us to understand what could be done about it. We also have the pleasure to work with Sergio Guzman from Columbia Risk Analysis and the whole team. They're going to be helping us to process in the information, ideas, and conversation that we will have. Finally, I would like to thank to our office in Bogota, Hebelius and Natalia Prieto. They have made an extraordinary work for the organization of this event. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, John. Now we are going to listen to a presentation from Eric Hans about the framework for the constructed capital. So Eric Hans is the director for the accountable investment in SIPE. Go ahead, Eric.
Thank you. So thank you to everyone joining us today. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules. We have an exciting panel, a couple of panels coming up. And this is a topic that is really at the center of what we do at the Center for Accountable Investment, looking at investment flows and how they impact both market and democratic institutions. The goal here is to get the investment to work the most for the recipient country, to get the benefits and the positive externalities that all of these investments can have. I'm going to start to share a screen here and see if we can see that. And if someone can give me an okay that we can see it. Yep. All right. So we're going to move on. Just to have a brief presentation here about a framework for constructive capital. And 3 I's here, investment, integrity, and impact. So a bit about SIPE to begin with. We're a mission-driven organization working at the intersection of markets and democracy. We've been working for about 40 years, and really with the belief that markets and democracy are 2 sides of the same coin. Our work is collaborative in nature, grassroots oriented, and really when we begin to work in a market, we come in and we come with no preconceived notions. We come to listen. We listen to folks and we listen to our partners and how they would like to see their country develop, their institutional environment develop. And in the case of the Center for Accountable Investment, how the partner would like to see the investment environment develop. At SIPE, we've got about 130 projects in more than 100 countries. We have 100 staff, both in DC and about 120 staff in country. Most of our staff is local. We believe that aligns incentives a bit better. So a bit about capital and agency. So for a long time, there was this preconceived notion that any investment is good investment. However, if I put a $20 bill on the table and don't disturb it, it doesn't really do anything for me. So this implies that there needs to be some agency behind that $20 bill. And this is really when we get into issues of the externalities of investment, where an investment of $20 million in a transparent manner that's being accountable to local stakeholders, that's a market-driven investment, is quite a bit different from a $20 million investment that seeks to raise barriers, that seeks to build moats between that investment and the rest of the economy. It's also a difference in orientation. If a $20 million investment comes into a country and seeks to engage local stakeholders, local SME community, and use local suppliers and distributors, it's a lot different than a $20 million investment that comes in and seeks to kind of keep its vertical in place and then quickly exit the market once the fixed capital investment or the fixed project is completed. So essentially what I'm trying to say here is that all FDI or all investment is not created equally. We take a look at corrosive versus constructive capital. So corrosive capital is really here on a spectrum. On the one side, we're talking about investment that is opaque in nature, that's not accountable to stakeholders, not market-oriented, versus the other side of the scale, where it's transparent, responsible to investors, responsible to stakeholders, and it's market-oriented. Now, this is not a black and white issue where we can say, this is a corrosive capital investment, or this is a constructive capital investment. Rather, we exist on this spectrum. The objective that we have here at the Center for Accountable Investment is not to limit investment. It's to make what we see as corrosive investment more constructive, and what we see as neutral investment more constructive. So it's to shift the whole paradigm to be more beneficial to the local recipient economic environment and to the recipient of that investment. Better for local social outcomes, better for the business community, and better for the recipient government, so they have a more constructive dialogue with the private sector. So we play both offense and defense, and I have a little football analogy here since World Cup is on. So we have constructive capital. We're about building a better business environment. This is where the private sector takes the lead in providing solutions to the government. Now, the government has to support those solutions. After all, it is the government that's responsible for the regulatory framework in which the investment or the business exists. When we deal with corrosive capital, we're about mitigating the corrosive effects. So about where there was a gap before, we're about closing that gap. Where there was discretion before, it's about closing that discretionary gap. And so it's not about limiting that investment into the market. It's about making that discretion and that potential corrupt act or the potential for the exploitation of governance gaps less, and to bring about better results for all the parties involved. We have here 6 cornerstones of what we call constructive capital. We have a positive piece, a rule of law, which most people are familiar with, accountable institutions, again, kind of a familiar term, political and economic freedom being vitally important to investment, social and economic inclusion, and a values-driven private sector. Now, you might say, well, whose values are theirs? Are there? Well, it's a human value, value of back to the other point of inclusion, of innovation, and of progress. So I would like to kind of make a distinction here at this point between what we call accountable investment and what we call responsible investment. So in the United States, we've been having a bit of debate about ESG and whether or not this is kind of politically motivated. And I'd like to make sure that we distinguish here what we're talking about. We're talking about responsible investment. This is associated with more of an obligation by the business community to do X, Y, or Z. This is the ESG approach, where we're disclosing non-financial information in our company disclosures, where we're measuring carbon output, where we're showing how we treat our laborers. It's a focus on measurement and accounting. When we talk about accountable investment, we're talking about ethics and compliance, this relationship between the business, civil society, and government. We're talking about private sector leadership, both on nonprofits and civil society. So we like to see management from business community come in and be the board or guide the civil society sector, give them advice, give them feedback to make them a more professional civil society sector. And it's about strategic investment into civil society organizations. So making those connections between the private sector, which has its own interests, and the civil society sector to support that civil society sector. So the civil society sector becomes less donor driven over time or donor connected over time, and more of a domestic focused civil society with ties to the business community and with ties to folks in market leadership or business leadership positions. Coming back to this issue of positive peace, it's really about, it focuses on the Institute for Economics and Peace survey. It's an annual global peace index, which ranks 163 independent states. I always have to look that number up, so I'm glancing here. Around 8 categories. I'm not going to read off the categories, you can read them yourself. But this is what we mean by positive peace. And within this positive peace, essentially what we're looking for are checks and balances, effective lines of communication, respect for the values and the opinions of others, and a way or a process by which we can resolve disputes in a transparent and accountable way. We have to remember that good policy development, good governance is an iterative process, and that we're not going to get the perfect solution the first time, or that rarely happens. We're going to get a good enough solution, then we're going to go back to the drawing board, see how that solution works, where the holes are, what's working, what's not working, and then make it better over time. And this is really the beauty of the relationship, or healthy relationship, between the private sector, the government, and civil society, is that they can all contribute to this positive peace, this kind of recurring dialogue that develops better policy over time, which results in more inclusion, more wealth development, and a more stable and solid foundation on which to build wealth and build a business. The values, talking about values, whose values? So what are the values of really any country? So it's about taking the scope of the values, about the role of leadership and governance. I was just at the Japanese embassy here in Washington, talking with members of the embassy, recognizing that Japanese corporate governance is quite a bit different from continental corporate governance and quite a bit different from American corporate governance. But somehow, we all exist within this international market system, and we all respect and understand each other's governance system. So it's not about a singular type of governance or a singular type of leadership, but rather developing a type of governance or type of leadership that's reflective of social and cultural values of the nation in which they exist. It's about stakeholder engagement. This is, engaging not only with civil society organizations, but local communities in which the investment or the fixed capital asset will eventually end up. It's about creating a long-term perspective, not hot capital or hot money flowing in and out of a country, which affects exchange rates, which is overall a bit detrimental to kind of the overall well-being of the kind of lower and middle classes. And it's about creating this entrepreneurial community based on trust. And you'll notice here the values, I'm not talking about rule of law issues. Rule of law is great and it takes a long time to develop. But in the interim, before we have a stable bedrock of rule of law and a good court system and a good arbitration system and a good mediation system, we have to have something to start our entrepreneurial community. And that starting point, to me, is based on trust among entrepreneurs and businesses. And we among ourselves and the entrepreneurial community can build off of that trust and build into a more stable system of rule of law, because it's what we need eventually to achieve scale and to achieve greater prosperity for not only our own businesses, but the value chain or the value of the businesses and our own employees as well. Going back to my 3 I's at the beginning: investment, integrity, and impact. So in the investment category, we're talking primarily about corrosive and constructive capital, this act of physically investing capital into a fixed capital asset or into a long-term development project, and how to make that work the best way for the recipient nation. It's about integrity. This is about anti-corruption norms. It's about institutions. It's about building in accountability into that investment process. And it's about impact and creating that virtuous cycle. So we might not have impact with the first investment or the first $20 million investment, but business people talk to one another. And for all of the funding of international development agencies and investment promotion agencies that we have out there, the best tool that nations have is word of mouth. And if investors come into a particular nation, they're treated even-handedly, they're treated in a transparent manner, they work within the rules and treat their employees well and follow the local rules and norms, it allows this virtuous cycle to kick off. And these business people talk to other business people, getting more capital, more investment into that market. Now you might say, well, that might overheat the market. My response would be that this is not overheating, but rather creation of options and overall lowering the cost of capital, because now we have more capital coming into the market. We have more options for businesses to exit. We have more options for entrepreneurs to obtain that startup capital or the angel investment to get their business off the ground and scale their business. And it creates this really virtuous cycle of repeated investment and feedback. Now, on the other hand, we have these corrosive investments or investments that seek to undermine or skirt the rule of law, and these are moat building or wall building investments, where you're building laws, you're building walls, you're building moats that undermine other investors' faith in your economy. And the key here, again, is to kind of make sure that those moats and those walls cannot be built in the first place. And we do that through good government policy, through the engagement of the local business community, and through the engagement of civil society. Because at the end of the day, it's about creating this virtuous cycle where we have more wealth and more businesses and more investment in our economies that give us more options as citizens and as policymakers, as civil society organizations, and as businesses. So with that, I will stop sharing there and I will hand it back to Kathy.
Excellent presentations, and those are two concepts of the corrosive and constructive capitals, all right? And what are the features that create the environment for bringing responsible investment? So thank you very much, Eric. So right now we're gonna focus on a panel with 3 experts and research of corrosive capital. They have worked with SIPE in research and investigation projects. So we are going to be talking right now with Damian Gonzalez, the coordinator of public management in SAIP, as a magister in public policies from the Tela University, in political science from the University of Buenos Aires. Also, he has the specialization in subjects in institutions. He was also a coordinator at Norteus, the first formal experience, the association between the municipalities of Buenos Aires. Also, we have Sasha Hania. She is a research assistant in Teiheikuashi University in Tokyo, Japan. Sasha is an Chilean analyst of international relations with a lot of experience as financial reporter or journalist. Currently, she works for many organizations. She cooperates with social investigation associated with the Instituto de Desafíos for the support of the democracy for the global governance in the University of Hisusuachi in Japan. That's an attend. So right there, her main areas are the influence in China and the implications of the science and technology in the society. And it has a PhD at the Advanced University, and she's finishing a governance study in Hisusuashi University as a student for the global leaders in the ODS. And finally, we will have Henry Oppert. He's the director of the project in the Fundación Milenio. He's a sociologist and researcher in the public service. He's been working for the vice presidency of the Republic, director of the governance project, and vice minister of planning. He's the director of Fundación Milenio project, and he has coordinated studies about corrosive capital and constructive capital in the country. So he's co-author and co-editor of Corrosive Capital in Bolivia and the Challenges for the Good Governance and the Constructive Capitals in Bolivia. Our moderator for this conversation is going to be Sergio Guzman. He's the director of Colombia Risk Analysis. Sergio Guzman is the director of Colombian Risk Analysis, and he provides risk analysis for commercial for the Andean region. Sergio has worked with customers from the private sector with different assignations, including financial inclusion, energy, manufacturing, agriculture, commerce, and logistic and transportation, and also in the in other sectors. Risk analysis. Sergio is also providing information to different governments and humanitarian and international organizations that work in Colombia. Sergio has a PhD in the international relations from the Escuela de Estudios Internacionales of the Johns Hopkins University. And with this, I'm going to give the floor to Sergio. Go ahead, Sergio. Catherine, thank you very much. And Skype, thank you very much. We are very honored to be here with this luxury panel talking about these subjects. All right, to start, I would like to talk a little bit about what of the constructive capitals that are the positive fees, the rule of law, the strong institutions, political and economic freedom, social inclusion from a private sector that has adequate values. By checking that list, how do you think, maybe I'm going to start with Henry. So how do you think those preconditions are given in Latin America, or what are the things that are missing in that sense? All right, so Henry, you got the floor. All right, hello, greetings from La Paz, Bolivia. It's a pleasure for me to be here in this distinguished forum. Well, to answer your questions, Sergio, I would say that our studies in the Millennium Foundation about the phenomena of the constructive capital, well, we can have a conclusion based on that and saying that there is a strong correlation between the investment that bring constructive capitals and the quality of the political and regulation institutional environment. What I mean with this is when the investment mainly the direct investment from abroad is given in some political framework and institutional frameworks, and they are adequate when the investments are regulated by independent regulators and professional regulators, and when besides there is a critical press and active citizenship that supervise the developing of the enterprises, there is a high probability that those investments have the potential to create a healthy business culture, therefore to generate mutual benefits and also equal benefits on one hand for the investors and on the other hand for the sector or for the country. Unfortunately, those conditions, those favorable conditions for the direct investment from abroad are not very clear. In Bolivia, there are some gaps. Democratic grants and in the development process are very evident. And precisely because of this reason, the big challenge that we have in Bolivia is to create a political, institutional, and regulated environment to be better and favorable for bringing or attracting national and international investment, mainly for that one that is full of constructive values. Thank you very much, Henry. I'm going to give the floor to Sasha because I would like, I mean, in the same sense, ask you, in Latin America, we usually, I mean, you feel that those preconditions are given, or there is a specific precondition in which Latin America needs to work much more than the others in order to develop a framework for the constructive capital development? So, well, first of all, thank you very much for this invitation. I mean, this meeting was pending from a long time ago, and I believe that is very important. I mean, now that ever, but that Latin America is seeing political changes back again in all the levels. Actually, my country and in Chile, they are discussing back again about a constitutional change that maybe is going to change the same basis of investments. Okay, going back to the question, I believe that Latin America has a history and a background, and Latin America has the conditions for international commerce, for the interchange. I mean, the international interchange is not the same as the abroad investment, but there is not any country that all the countries base part of the economy in exports of some natural product or some natural resource. Therefore, the countries have some experience with abroad countries, and or maybe it does not matter that there's been some interesting experiments in the national production, but the big framework and how the world is being developed, Latin America needs the world for the development. And this has made that, depending on the country, of course, the institutionality is done in regards to the agreement for the international commerce. And that has given a different experience to Latin America that maybe to other regions around the world that are in development in regards to the relation with the main stakeholders, commercial international stakeholders. Argentina knows a lot about the relations with Europe, for example. Chile knows about the commercial interchange with the Pacific Asia. So when this is international investment, well, I believe that there is a very important gap, not only in the prevention of something that was talked about before, the corrosive capital and the capacity to prevent. I mean, the need to attract capitals, the capacity to prevent that capital is used for different means, for different ends. And also to give certain level of trust to the international or for the abroad investment or certain events that are not connected in Latin America, but obviously bring concerns to the one that finally is going to set the money into the region to the investor. Because as you mentioned, Latin America is generalized most of the time. And when you generalize Latin America, well, when a corruption subject occurs in some place, maybe there is an increase in the security for investment. So there are some exceptions, and I believe that TLIF was an exception for many years, but it's not the case anymore. So Eric mentioned something about trust. I believe that there are all the institutional tools for giving the trust. If we give some science internally that, for example, if there is an enterprise that wants to be corrupted, well, it's going to be blocked. And also to invest with a good faith, so that if you invest your money, the money is not going to be lost because there is any kind of institutional protection for that investment. Thank you. Well, and thank you. Finally, Damian, the first precondition that Eric talked at the very beginning for the constructive capital is the positive piece. And maybe in Colombia, well, we are discussing about total peace. And the positive piece includes accepting everybody's right to have an operational government, business, optimus environment, high capitals, free stream of information, and low corruption level, among others. Argentina, I mean, is not characterized for having some of those, but you think that is it possible to reach or to get that aspect? I mean, working in what specific elements? How Argentina is going to get it? Thank you, Sergio. And it's a pleasure to say hello to everyone. Argentina, the next year is going to be 40 years of democracy. And the 40 years of democracy, they have some common values, like free election, like respecting the free press. And that was very constant in the last 4 decades. So there is a common challenge, which is that the one that Argentina has for many decades, which is the macroeconomic stability. What is the meaning for that? Well, when there are some external restriction and Argentina doesn't have dollars to support the currency, there is a pendulum in the institutions of the government. So in some moment, we take some loans. On some moments, we get some bilateral loans. And all these has the intention of strengthening the international investment. So that is the first item, the dimension, the 3 dimensions of the analysis of type. This number 1, the finance. Number 2, regulation. Argentina has a robust regulatory framework. And number 3, which is more important, are the management capacities. What is the meaning for this? We have a very robust regulatory framework, but sometimes is poorly implemented. So I believe that that is a key point to work with between the civil society, public workers, and especially the private sector with a integrity standard to do an appropriate monitoring of every single project. I can tell you briefly that, for example, to have environmental standards in Argentina, there are 2 dams built, and they do not have any environmental, the nuclear plant, for example, well, some other projects that have to do with private investment like oil and gas. Yeah, and some of the environmental impacts are not very clear. So I believe that this is part of doing investment that have integrity, but at the same time, with to have some environmental awareness. So I believe that Argentina has some not very favorable conditions. We have a robust regulatory framework with some controls and regulators in the executive. And I believe that what we need to improve is the management and the monitoring to the projects, who we decide to invest and why to invest with that. And well, something that you mentioned before that Eric was also saying before is about the trust and working together in shared values between the private sector and the public sector. I don't know, Henry, if you can maybe tell me in Bolivia, how's the trust environment between the private sector and the public sector? In particular, right now, we can go back to Chile and Argentina, but I would like to understand, I'm interested in understanding how in Bolivia works this understanding between the two sectors, private and public, and if it's really taking and creating a trust environment. Okay, first of all, I'm gonna highlight the importance of approaching collaboration between the public and private sector. In Bolivia, they talked about that a lot for many years ago. But the truth is that the outcomes, the advances, the results, practical and specific results are not very good, are very few. Naturally, for this, there is a big influence of the quality of the government, all right? In our particular case, the strengthening the alliances or partnership between the public and private sector requires to have a government that understands better this type of policies. And of course, this government needs to have the will to foster the right measurements, to foster and to facilitate diverse modalities of association and for cooperation from the public sector with private sectors. Unfortunately, we do not have nowadays committed government with very strong public and private alliance, which is a big obstacle. Even though I would like to highlight the importance of developing a regulatory and efficient framework with clear rules equal for private and public enterprises. So there should be a regulation that fosters and motivates the free competition in the market with no privilege for the private or for the public companies that actually goes against the private sector enterprises. So that is one of the challenges that we have in Bolivia to promote efficiently the cooperation public and private policies. And I believe that it's possible to build these associations. I will give priority to two items. One, infrastructure investment, infrastructure for basic services and connectivity. I believe that that is a very interesting field for having the resources together from the public and from the private sector. And in second place, investigation and technological research development. I believe that this is actually a very good field, and it will have the advantage of bringing interest and participation at the universities as a relevant actor or stakeholders to promote the technological development, which is another challenge that we have. Sasha, at the very beginning, you mentioned the new constitution that is being written in Chile. So, of course, the first attempt failed. This new constitution failed. So, how did that process, constitutional process, has affected the trust between the private sector and the public sector, and how it has affected the people that is running down the new regulations? Well, I believe that there is something that Henry mentioned that is very important. He named, he say, the same rules for everyone in Chile is named the neutrality of the investment. Neutral investment. Even if the relations between two countries are good or bad, even beyond, for example, China, because it's a research case, for example, China has 40% of the commercial interchange with Chile when an investment is evaluated with the same criteria as, for example, to evaluate France. So I believe that there is something that evidently could be kept with the constitutional change that is coming. And to answer your question, the process that we have with the constitutional process, is that it was very, I mean, there was a pandemic at the same time, the strikes, protests in 2018. So, well, there is a very important uh, reduced in the abroad investments or investment from abroad. So how can the constitutional process be given to the uncertainty of the change of investment that is, I mean, there is a reduction of the 50% is dramatic. Not taking into account that international contest was in an international crisis as well. So it's very difficult. So, but we can say that the draft that was denied by the population rejecting the project had some concerning elements in regards to equity towards the law. Once was approved, or if the draft was approved, the draft that was being presented, the new proposal, which is that was approved the last Friday. No, they started discussing last Friday, and it was approved a couple of days ago, and it's been internally processed, institutionally and culturally processed. It has some important institutional items that are very important that, well, they will not have a popular participation in the same way that the other project had. It's going to have some institutional items. I mean, Chile lacks the technocracy that I believe that any international investor can read, and they will think that there is going to be a constitutional process that is going to be kept with some based aspect for the current system that I believe will give some trust, certain degree of trust to that international investment that at the end of the day, they didn't know what was going to happen with the new constitution. But to close the subject once again, with 3 years of pandemic, strikes, protests, international economic crisis, is very difficult to say yes. The constitutional process kicked out all the international investment. It's very difficult to answer that. Thank you very much. And Damian, an organization like SIPE, which is in a very common position that is not affiliated politically either. So what is the role of organizations like this in creating dialogue or conversation interaction spaces to create trust between two stakeholders, private sector, for example, and the public sector? In many cases, like in Argentina, they are so far away ideologically talking and politically talking. That's a key point. I can say that it's very important, but Argentina in general has a civil society that is very strong for the last 4 decades. The democracy in Argentina has free elections with a robust civil society that provides many ideas. There is an interchange between civil society and the government when there are changes, and that is something positive. So I believe that Argentina has maybe a pathway to give a voice to the private sector, which is a pending item in our country, and by articulating some recommendation based on evidence, which is what SIPE does, so we can clarify the panorama a little bit. So I believe that the agenda that is coming, that is connected with investment of public infrastructure, has to do with first the macroeconomic stability, because it provides a vulnerability point for all kind of loans, bilateral loans. And for example, the loan that has Argentina, there was a devaluation, a big devaluation in Argentina. I believe that loan does not have any specific affectation. So as we mentioned, those Chinese loans, they have a constant renegotiation and the conditions are not very clear. Then I believe that we have some pending items. So I would like to mention this subject that I mentioned before about going deeper in some state capacity to improve the management. We need public workers, but besides the worker servers, we need professionals with high quality to access for due to the quality, skills, and abilities for them to be able to work with an institutional memory that monitors the subjects. For example, in Argentina, one idea that we can talk about is that the investment they should have an quality environmental seals or certification. Another element is the integrity treaty that we sign it up in Argentina from time to time, but there should be monitoring to the renegotiations to the conditions about how the money is invested. So I do believe that those are some of the items that can be brought to the discussion because all the stakeholders in the country are involved. Public management, they are in a transition world for the governments. That is another pending items that can create the debate to invest in infrastructure, public infrastructure, because we have the bilateral investment of China in energy subjects. We have multilateral organizations in sanitation pipelines or networks. And then we have the government investing in roads, basic roads. So we have those three elements. We need to consolidate that, and they have to be consolidated in a plan or in a law or mechanism for transition so that some policies to hold. So I believe that Argentina has 40 years of democracy with no interruption. They are very good because we have seen recent examples of free democracy because Argentina, and I believe that we are in conditions to give an extra step in demanding integrity, environmental quality, and quality in the monitoring of the projects. About the subject that you mentioned about the democracy, I would like to ask this to Sasha. In regards to the last Latino barometric poll or survey, the trust in the democracy has the lowest levels of trust. So there are more, they lie more the authoritarians of favoring leaders that are not on the side of the democracy. So I just wonder how this corrupts the corruption for the constructive capital. If you can tell us a little bit about the, I mean, why people do not feel trust to the political system that you have. Well, I believe that there is a whole investigation or research line that haven't been able to answer that question. I believe that, well, talking about what Damien mentioned before, an important item is how the civil society is being developed in Latin America. So there is not a lot of emphasis, and we saw that in Chile when we made the corrosive capital study, how important we could see how important actors or the stakeholders of the civil society were to have a visibilization to avoid the corrosive capital. We saw that, for example, in this train from Valparaiso and Santiago, that was a Chinese investment, and the civil society raised the voice and they say that they were not using the right legislation, so they stopped and they reinstalled from zero that contract. So I believe that there are not enough words to mention how important is the civil society. And going back to your question, the problem is that it seems that there was an implicit promise in the democracy as a system that the democracy was going to bring socially, economical, and development and benefits in general. And especially, I would say that in 2015, it happens when some countries stop growing due to the democracy system. When the countries start seeing more corruption, even though they have democracy, when countries start seeing that their leaders are behaving very authoritarian, even though they live in a democracy country. So when the system is becomes an electoral democracy and that is not a liberal democracy, I mean, the people do not agree. They see the difference between the two systems. And to explain in a simple way this, when an integral democracy is promised with political and civil rights, and we only have elections, so people obviously they don't like the democratic system anymore. Then why this is so dangerous? Well, I believe that not only from 2018, but it was really, really concerning during, I would say, like countries like Russia and China. Some part of the population say, why do we need democracy if I am not growing as it was promised? If this democracy is not giving me the social benefits that I was promised. Why I got this news that this country that everybody said that is I mean we saw that in Saudi Arabia. They mentioned the basic universal income. So maybe it's not the democracy what they are looking for. Like let me say 40 years ago, and that's very dangerous. And of course, this parcelization of the investors is produced. There is this dissociation produced. I mean, what is the difference between having Russia investing or having France investing? What is the difference? China build our 5G or Norway? At the end of the day, it is the same. I believe that, I mean, there is a need. The last article that I published to try to leave this idea that democracy are only elections, first of all, and stop thinking or stop being afraid of to the technocratic aspects of the democracy. We can speak for years about this, but well, let's continue with the next question. But yeah. Yes, of course. I'm really interested in knowing a little bit more about the opinion of Henry about the same subject because I believe that the trust in the democracy is not only the elections, of course, but also the processes for removing the presidents of the positions and how a change of regime is changed. For example, in Bolivia has been an example of different situations that have led to that. So I don't know how you read the same question, Henry, about the state of the democracy in your country. There is no question. There is no doubt that the trust, the institutions are all together and credibility are all together. What we are facing right now is a trust or credibility crisis in the democratic institutions, basically in all Latin America and also in many countries in the developed world. This is a very extensive phenomenon contemporarily. And undoubtedly, to the lack of trust, the credibility in the institutions is weakened. And at the same time, this damage is erosive the environment of business environment. And of course, this affects the quality of the investment, but also the conditions in which the enterprises can perform their activities. In the Bolivian situations, we have a problem that is even worse because our Bolivian society has low levels of social trust. This has been revealed by many studies and research that evaluate the trust. Traditionally, big groups of our population have experienced feelings of not trusting and aversion to the international investment. And this is a phenomena that has cultural roots and historical roots. And that's why it is so complex and the worst. Easily, it can be it can produce populist proposals and for nationalists and old and traditional policies in the government. Of course, not trusting in the entrepreneur and especially to the international investment. Well, is obstacle to bring or to bring the constructive capital. We are really aware of this. That's why we want to know how to strike this lack of trust. It's a key question, of course, because it's very evident that the lack of trust is fed by the prejudices. There are many myths about the international investment, and of course, lack of education and lack of more objective knowledge of what the economical processes are, the businesses, and the role that the private capital has. Precisely, that's the importance that we give to the studies and research that we are doing to have concrete cases to show evidences that the international investment in our country have and may have positive results in several moments of the economical history of the country, and that there are some experiences that could be highlighted because that will help to foster more informed debate in the political society. So that's what we are doing, and we have to trust that if we continue experience the investigation with the studies, with compared experiences, we can inform our culture that is not believing in the attraction of the international investments. All right, Henry, I'm going to continue with you because you mentioned something that I believe that is very important, which is the trust of the people to the international investment in the country. But there is another side of the coin, the trust from the international investor to the country. Every time I was working with customers that work in Bolivia, it was necessary to talk about that the situation in the country in 2005 with the gas and expropriation war. And we have to tell them that there was a low risk for that to happen. But I believe that many investors have in their mind a vision, a characterization of the country. So do you think that has changed? Do you think that the investors now feel the trust in the country, keeping into account not only the mega projects that are required, but also the biggest amount of resources? No, unfortunately, no. The international ranking shows that Bolivia is left behind, left behind in the position in regards to the capacity to attract international investment. And in fact, we have a big lack of international investment in Bolivia. And this has a lot to do with the trust that there is or the over the international investors. They feel that the country is not trustful, that the country is not safe for the investment, that the country doesn't have rules and policies that guarantee the sustainable business in the time. So that's why we have a lot of accent in the necessity to clean three big problems that we have in the business environment in Bolivia. Number one, weak institutionality. Number two, the state of law, which is very bad, and the lack of transparency in the public management, and in particular in the state contracting for public construction. So that is the challenge, legality and transparency. I believe that there are like a virtual triangle that somehow other countries have done it, but in our case, it's the homework is pending. And facing this in the studies that we are doing about constructive capital, about international investment, in Bolivia, we have advanced a lot in some specific proposals that try to improve the institutionality to strengthen in the legal institutionality. And we believe that this could bring back the trust of the international investors in the Bolivia economy. Well, the results are not easy to reach. We are not going to be able to change the bad image or the bad name that the country has in the short term, but we are working, thinking that we are harvesting for the futures. And as we get political better conditions, we believe it's going to happen in some moments. Of course, these reforms that we are proposing will improve the trust in the business environment in Bolivia. In that sense, we are very optimistic for the future. Damian, you talked about the environment in your two interventions, and nowadays they are talking about the environment about and it's into a frame that is like, I mean, nowadays what is on fashion are the ESG investments. So you think this is true? Do you think we have some objective ways to assess the ESG environment? Do we have tools for this is true, or these are only words that the investors are saying to feel good themselves? I believe that Argentina has a pathway to this. I would like to clarify that I am not an expert in that, but I believe that Argentina, well, is not too much and not too few in the subject. We can set it up like something that we can aspire. I believe that Argentina in the next years, we need to talk about this. And I believe that Argentina is the eighth country in extension in territory in the world. I mean, it's very big, but it has 50 million inhabitants, very similar to South Korea. So we are in a small country inside a big area. So the big country is focused in the Buenos Aires, in the city of Buenos Aires, in some agricultural center, and the big natural resources that are in the northbound for mining and in the southbound for water and energy subjects, they are not well attended. I mean, if the population were better distributed, there will be more sustainability. So the environmental subject that impacts the environment and also impacts the community when there is, for example, a mining project in the north one of the country, there is always a call to the attention, for example, to the community. There are many examples. These are provinces in Argentina that are listening all these in theories somehow in the practice as well. And I believe that it's important to pay attention not only to the environmental foot track, because some people investing from the outside, they set some money, but then the environmental problem is for us. We inherit the environmental problems. So we need to take care of our environment and our communities. Latin America is very diverse. Argentina is not the exception. We have very diverse communities in all the country, in the urban composition, but also in the ethnic composition. So I believe that this is a subject that is still an aspirational subject, but like the democracy, in the meantime, we are trying to take this into the practice. So I believe that Argentina has an environment ministry, and that it does not only have to do with the investment, like the construction of the dams or pipelines or aqueducts and sewers, but also in the subject related with the fields. Argentina has cruel fires. We have a province that is next to Buenos Aires. They have fires and the smoke arrive to this place. They cover the whole sky. So we need to regulate. We have a lack of regulation in the environmental subject. And we believe that we are the eighth country. We have a lot of resources, but I believe that because of this, we need to honor the environment that we have. And If we have the money, the project, the investment, the needs, the strategical needs of energy in the sectors, I believe that we need to strengthen the communitary and environmental needs that we have. Thank you, Sasha. I'm going to give you the floor because it's been said that Chile, for many years, many people say that Chile was the role model to follow. Chile was the first Latin American member of the OTA. And I believe that the question is how? It's not like what happened. No, it's like, is it helpful to be member of the OTA? Or is only just like to share a picture and there are some reports every year, or the odds really help the countries to get constructive capitals to the countries? I don't know. There is a subject we haven't talked yet. We haven't discussed in this conversation, which is the soft power, not only of the country, that has an influence like United States extending the cultural impact and the trust. There is an interesting project that the Catholic University made about other countries as well, but also the soft power that the Latin American countries have, and how in the international level and the institutional level, I mean, in that sense, to be part of the OC gives to a country at least a certification, we could say, like a certification of the country serious, that that's something you have done, well done, to qualify of the out of the country. The problem, this is what Chile lived. There is a moment in which it's possible that you are trapped. The countries have the middle income, in which you reach a point that you do not qualify for receiving support for being a country developed, but you don't reach a country that you have developed. Therefore, it's produced what happened in Chile. There is like an interesting strike or hit reduction in the growth. 5% 1 year and 3 or 2. And then we are very happy when we grow 2% in a year. For a developed country like Japan or United States, it's a very good number, but for a country, yeah, and development is not a very good number. Type growth per year, so it's not a number that matches with the population expectations, hoped. The population is not interested if the number is 2 or 6%, but they are interested if the inflation is bigger than the salary. They're interested if the economy goes very slow, if they are interested in knowing, for example, if they've been for 5 years in the same job position. So as a consequence of a very slow growth. So that produces a lot of frustration. To answer your questions, when we talked about the standards of the OAK, I know that they have made an interesting job in pushing the investors country and the countries in development with those features to continue or to implement screening investment systems that can raise the standards for the international investment, not only in the value level, which is interesting. It's important to respect some legal standards and also the respect for the data privacy. It's a law in Europe, but what is the line between the privacy of the data and international interest? And a standard for investment for the countries that invest. I believe that Chile it's been good to be in the advance. In some moment, Chile was in some moment to be in this. I mean, that would be something unbearable, but there is a moment in which you want to start producing a public policy developed public policy, and that requires sacrifices. But in my opinion, but this is a personal opinion, there's been some structural mistakes in some impositive subjects in Chile in the last 10 years, in the way the system was reformed. The taxes, they increased 10%, the corporative taxes, of course, is going to affect the investments. You don't need to add to. Many benefits were taken away to mid-sized companies that really affected the growth, and there is a responsibility in terms of public policies and mistakes that were made in Chile that made this growth accelerating, and then the pandemic, which is another subject, and now the way the constitutional reform, which is another subject that is part of this cluster of crises that is being lived in the country. Thank you, Sasha. Recently, I saw a video in Twitter. A person was in the Buenos Aires street, and the person was asking to the people, what do you prefer, to reduce the inflation or that Argentina wins the soccer World Cup? And many of the people said that prefer that Argentina to win the soccer World Cup, and the Ministry of War said yes. Yes, we need to win the soccer World Cup, and then we can lead with the inflation. So, Damiana, I'm not going to ask you to solve the problem of inflation in Argentina, but how this inflation generates lack of trust in the capacity, in the acquisition, lack of trust in the currency. So in that sense, it's an obstruction or an obstacle for the constructive capital. Thank you, Sergio. I'm going to answer the question of the inflation or the soccer World Cup, but well, I can say the World Cup, yes, but also I hope that public server talks about the inflation. Why in Argentina the inflation is not a subject that is not a desperate subject? Because we have 100% of inflation, hyperinflation every year. So how Argentina can explain that this is not hyperinflation? We've been for more than 50 years like that. So we only have 10 years of stability in which the uh, currency in Argentina was connected to the dollar. So it was very difficult to Argentina. So we move like in a limbo, very difficult to define. I believe that in this moment, this is being trying to be regular, and I want to connect it with our talks, because a way to organize this is how to define the incomes in dollars in Argentina. Argentina has specific imports, and on the other side, Argentina is trying to incorporate dollars into the economy. So it's being done. I can give you some data in which 8 years ago, Argentina had a relation of 10-1 between the investment in the infrastructure with their own money and with international investment, multilateral, bilateral funds, and so on. So after 8 years, after the pandemic, after the crisis of the debt, the relation is 2-1. I mean, out of $5,000 million for infrastructure, the half comes from international funds, $2,500 million. So we have 1/3 is coming from external funds. What I mean with this is that the investment in infrastructure, at least in Argentina, and maybe this is an alert or is an investigation that I propose for other countries in Latin America, this is becoming debt under the belt. I don't know. That is the way in Spanish to say that. We do not have financial dollars. We use infrastructure investment. And I believe that this is very dangerous, because the positive thing, it has a pay for their own infrastructure, but It also had the negative side, which you cannot have this as a financial debt. So we are duplicating the debt somehow. So we have internal debt with bonus in our currency in pesos, and we have external debt in dollars that constrains the external capacities of Argentina, because this makes the loans much more expensive. And we also have this third debt that was created recently to complement that are the external investments. So I believe that this is a risk, especially talking about the integrity and finance as well, but it's one of the alternatives that Argentina is seeking for correcting the inflation. I mentioned if you in Bolivia, in Chile, in Colombia, you have an inflation at 100%. So you have a problem, you have hyperinflation. But in Argentina, 100%, 100 of the salaries are increased. So we have a badcation, we have an unsteady system with some external constraints or restrictions. One of the alternatives that is being generated that we can identify right now is the external investment, in which the owned funds were reduced more than $16,000 million to 5,000, and the external funds, they still represent a high percentage. So, well, I believe that that is the answer, somehow an elective answer, but is related with the external realization and the role that the infrastructure investment and the decisions of the people that invest. One thing is the monetary fund, and a different thing is the Chinese government. Thank you very much, Demian, and well, to the panel for your insights and your opinions. I believe that it's very clear that we have a lot of work to do for the constructive capital to be compliant in Latin America. Also, we understand that there are some political obstacles, as Henry mentioned, for this to happen. Even though to be part of the organization or group or clusters of country that give you a standard, like Sasha mentioned, and of course that Argentina is going to be the soccer World Cup winners. All right, Catherine, let's go back. Thank you for participating in this participation in these panels. Thank you very much. Very, very interesting conversations. And you mentioned many subjects related with the state of the democracy and also with the environment for investment of every country. I would like to thank everyone here for your participation in this event. I would like to thank to our speakers, Sasha, for sharing the Chile experience, and reports for Sergio and Henry Oporto and Sergio and Damian for sharing the experience. A special thanks to Sergio Guzman for moderating this fantastic conversation, and also to Eric Hans for sharing the framework of constructive capital, that leads our conversation today. We have more than 100 persons from different countries here representing the most of the regions around the world. The diversity of participants show the importance of this subject in the region and in the world. The good government is an essential topic for the countries to protect the democracy, and at the same time to accept international investment responsible and constructive. That is the recipe for the inclusive economical development. The different speakers today has a number of the best practices that bring constructive capitals, like factors that includes the peace, the state of law, solid institutions, political rights, and economical rights. The private sector very strong. That's words on favor of the democracy. So thank you very much for connecting today, and you can follow our work on Twitter. And if you want to see much about our projects, you can see what our partners are doing. So you can go to our social networks or to we are going to close this event. And finally, we want to thank you all again. Thank you very much.